was in the Army's interest to send a senior officer student back as a fully qualified pilot to whatever assignment had necessitated that he or she become a pilot as quickly as possible. Further, if the Army felt an officer in mid-career needed to be a pilot, it made little sense to send them to Rucker only to have them fail the course of instruction. With this in mind, blue flag students were tutored rather than simply taught. It was in the Army's interest that they earn their wings. While most blue flag students were majors or lieutenant colonels, there were exceptions at both ends of the rank hierarchy. Most of these officers were colonels, but there was far less common the occasional captain or even lieutenant. In the case of the junior officers, they were most often aides-de-camp to general officers already qualified for regular aviators. They were assigned to blue flight or transition into fixed-wing aircraft. It made sense to have an aide-de-camp who could fly as general in both the helicopter and in the C-12 Huron, a twin turboprop used to fly senior officers around. Huron was the Army's name for the Beechcraft Super King Air. It annoyed Colonel Edmonds that Army aviators almost invariably called the aircraft the King Air rather than the Huron, but he couldn't do much about it except ensure that the term King Air never appeared in news stories emanating from his office. Such a junior officer, this one a lieutenant, a general officer's aide-de-camp sent to blue flight or transition training into the C-12 Huron, was to be the subject of the story Colonel Edmonds planned to write today. Colonel Edmonds was more than a little annoyed that he had had to dig up the story himself. He should have been told, not have had to hear a rumor and then run down the rumor. He had happened to mention this to the post commander when he suggested to the general that if he were to release a photograph of the general standing together with the lieutenant before a building named for the lieutenant's father, it would more than likely be printed widely and reflect well upon Army aviation and the Army itself. 2 months before, Colonel Edmonds had thought he was on to another story, one just as good, perhaps, as the one he was on to today. That one, however, hadn't worked out. What had happened was that Colonel Edmonds had seen a familiar name on the bronze dedicatory plaque of the building. He had inquired